Well, grace and peace to you from God our Father and our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Amen. I had an opportunity to go to Rome when I was 13. I went with my parents and we had a spectacular time. I vividly remember a few of the places we toured, and one of those places was the catacombs right outside the city. It was an odd combination of feelings going down. It was kind of exciting and suspenseful, and also a bit nerve-wracking as well. Because we were walking down into a dark cave, dull and musty, surrounded by dead coffins. We walked through the rocky hallway, getting deeper and deeper. The only light was artificially lighting up the place. We were in the midst of the dead, cold and constrained. After our tour, it felt so nice to emerge from the catacombs with the warm and the bright sun shining down on us. Now contrast the catacombs with when I was at the Sistine Chapel at the Vatican. Oh my gosh, the artwork was so beautiful there. There was so much life and expression pouring out from the walls. You could gaze all around you and be captivated by the space. You just felt alive and energized seeing these depictions of God and creation in a building that was considered precious by many. The catacombs was an experience of death. The Sistine Chapel was an experience of life. And in the same way, the dynamics of death and life are very apparent in our reading today. Jesus' friend Lazarus was sick and eventually died. It was tragic and heartbreaking, and Jesus wasn't there. He knew. Jesus knew Lazarus had fallen asleep, and then he went 2 days later. He found himself in a heartbreaking situation, greeted by Martha and Mary, who both said, "If only you had been here sooner." They are mourning. Their brother is dead, and Jesus could have stopped it. If only Jesus had been there when he was needed most. Well, at least that's from their perspective. Do you ever feel like Jesus has not showed up when you needed him? Where death has happened and he is nowhere to be found? You're not alone in feeling this. I mean, Martha and Mary had Jesus physically present in their lives, and he wasn't there when they wanted him to be. And yet, Jesus does show up. Martha and Mary say, "If only you were here sooner," but Jesus is there now. The timing was not what Martha and Mary wanted, but Jesus does show up. And here's what he does. He starts by comforting them. He reminds them of who he is, the resurrection and the life. Jesus comes to bring life to those who are experiencing death. Jesus cares about his friends, and he reassures them of God's intention to bring life. He doesn't stand far away from the situation. He doesn't just come in and boom, use his powers and leave. No, Jesus is close to them. He is compassionate towards them. And most of all, he enters into their suffering. Jesus knows he can raise Lazarus from the dead. But when he sees Mary and Martha crying, when he sees the other Jews with them crying, he was disturbed and began to weep himself. Jesus does not exempt himself from our suffering. He enters into it. When we weep, he weeps. When we mourn, he mourns. But he also brings hope. A hope that will end the weeping and the mourning. A hope that he can save Lazarus and us from death. And so, Jesus goes to that smelly, dark, desolate tomb. Jesus entered the literal place of death of his friend and raised him to new life. Lazarus is alive. You may also be feeling like you are in a place of isolation and death. This pandemic has pushed us all into isolation. The virus itself and the fear of it both are causing death. We feel uncertain, anxious, and maybe not very hopeful. But friends, Jesus comes to you like he did Martha, Mary, and Lazarus in our story today. He is the resurrection and the life. He is the one who brings life in the midst of death. I don't know what the timing is. I don't know why sometimes it feels like Jesus shows up right away, and other times it feels like it takes years. But he did show up for Mary and Martha, and he will show up for us. In the meantime, when it feels like he's not around, we can lament. And we are given permission to ask that question: where are you, God? That's what Mary and Martha did. And Jesus didn't scold them. He didn't say, "How dare you not trust me? You should trust me more." No, instead, when they asked, "Why weren't you here sooner?" he cared for them. Jesus is our hope. He is the one who will be intimately close to us when all else fails. Even when we feel like we are secluded in our very own tomb, Jesus will enter even that space. And he will call out to you, "Beloved child of God, come out." For Jesus overcomes all death, and he does not forsake us. Jesus will enter into our suffering. Look no further than the cross if you want a reminder that Jesus knows human suffering. Jesus knows what we go through. And even though we are stuck in this global crisis, God is still present and still loves us. Even if we were to die, God has got us. Even now in our life when we struggle, God has got us. I know it's Lent, but as followers of Christ, we live as resurrection people. We experience God's claim on us in our baptism, and we have the forgiveness of sin proclaimed to us in baptism and communion. We practice new life often. Whenever we make the mark of the cross with some water on our foreheads to remember our baptism, we remember the new life that we are given. And we should do this every day. And we can bring that same new life to others. As Luther would say, we are Christ to our neighbor. And physical presence would be so great. But we can't safely do that right now. But we can bring this new life to others by making a phone call, doing a video call, sending a message. We can check in with our neighbor. Let someone know you are thinking about them. Ask them how they are doing. Support one another in prayer, for it is together and by the grace of God that we can make it through. For even if we feel alone, Jesus will come right beside us. Jesus will enter our suffering. He will weep with you when you need to weep. He will comfort you when you need to be comforted. And above all else, He will love us, and He will be with us, now in this life and forevermore. Amen. At this time, we are going to do the, we're going to do something new. We're going to do something new. We're going to do the passing of the peace, Facebook style. So, what